Okay, so today I'm here to talk to you about using your body as an interface, which is not novel. I mean, all of us, or most of us, have a smartphone in our pocket, and our body is the interface. We touch it a lot. But there are other ways of doing it, and so what we will explore today is these other ways of doing it. My background, I've been for the past 15 years, it starts to show, so there's some time on this, so the white hairs and all of that. But I'm split between research, where I work at one of the largest research centers in Portugal, which is Telecommunications Institute. And I'm also an entrepreneur. So based on this research, we've also found ways of making some of these outputs go beyond the lab and into practical applications. And so over the past 15 years, I've been split a little bit between this research, but also with an applied practice to it, which is a little bit about what I'll talk to you about today, is how to make things more user-friendly and more understandable that some time ago it wasn't possible. So, as I mentioned, we live in a sensors world. We all know about things like the Kinect, where you can move to interact with a game, the Leap Motion, where you can use your gestures also to interact with the computer a little bit easier than the standard interfaces. There's also the sensors that come along with us every day, like the smartwatches that track your health, that track your motion, your sleep activity, and all of these things. And all of these are interfaces. And if that wasn't enough, there's a lot of course, the most pervasive of them all is the phone. So the phone also tracks a lot of information about you, and you interact with it with your body as well. And if this wasn't enough, there are also platforms that people use to create even more sensors. So some of you may be familiar with the Arduino, if not all. And the Arduino has exploded into variants that are more wearable-friendly, that have more computing capabilities, all as a way of enabling people to sense more, to interact more, to be more interactive and more expressive with the world. And then another example is the Raspberry Pi, so this mini computer that a lot of you may be familiar with as well, and that, just to show you a little bit of the scale, in the first 4 years alone, it sold more than 8 million units. 8 million is a big number. I've learned some time ago that it's quite popular to set up download farms for content that people legally download, So that's a big part of this number, but still it shows that once you lower the learning barrier and the cost barrier, a lot of people can access technology that enable them to do much more than they were capable of doing before. And the fact is that with these tools, when creative people like all of us put their hands on it, awesomeness happens. Let's see some examples. One of them is quite topical to this time. It's this American guy. I think this would only be possible in America. In Europe, there are some laws that prevent you from using flamethrowers and stuff. But what this guy has done was he sourced the flamethrower somewhere in eBay or something. He hooked it up to an Arduino, and then in the fence gate of his house, he put a sensor that detected whenever anyone opened the fence. And when the fence would open, the flamethrower would go on, and he saved a lot on candy in the year that he's done this. So this is an example of things that people do just for fun, just because it's cool to do something like this. And then you have other examples of things that start for fun, but that end up being a little bit more serious, introducing actual benefits for people's lives. And this is another example. So this is a girl in the US that, again, took a few Arduinos, a few servos, it hacked a lot of this stuff together, and they made like a Back to the Future shoe. Who here knows about Back to the Future? Okay, yeah, well, it's good. Sometimes I do this example and people, well, what's that, man? Back to the Future. You are so old. And so she hacked stuff together with a force sensor on the heel, and when the person put the foot inside the shoe, the laces would tie automatically. Now, this is on a form factor that most of us, because we are all a little bit geeky, we wouldn't mind wearing it. It's cool, right? It has a lot of wires coming out. But this is not actually something that a normal consumer would use. But the thing is that Nike actually came across this project and they integrated in what they call the Power Laces product. And so they have this shelf-worthy product that actually integrates the concept that the girl had developed and put it on a commercial product that is now available for anyone. But what I'm here to talk more about is that what about our body signals? All of these examples, in some way or another, they require the body as an interface. Even opening the fence is using the body as an interface. Using the sensor on the heel of the shoe, your heel is the interface to tie the laces. And so these are examples that are more mundane. But there are other examples, which are the signals that are inside you. We saw a brilliant demo of Alex this morning where he was using the brain signals to control the cinematics. And those are the signals that we've been mostly focused on, the signals that actually go inside you and that sometimes you cannot see that well. Normally, these signals were bound to a hospital setting. Whenever we talk about physiological sensing or body signals, the first picture that comes to mind is a hospital bed. And not only that, but also devices that are quite complex to use. If I talk to many people about physiological sensing, they say, well, I will take a whole semester to learn how to use it. In the end of the semester, I don't even know how to put the cables. It's all very complex. I don't want to deal with that, okay? So that's kind of the standard reaction. And what we've done was set out to change the paradigm, to make some of these technologies more user-friendly and more designer-friendly in the sense of having them not as a problem, but as an extension of the tool set that people can use. And so we've been focused on developing this on what we call the Vitalino ecosystem. So it's a set of hardware and software tools that make these things easier. So one of the things that we've done was make these tools available in a single board. And so instead of having all the wires and all the cables, you have a board like an Arduino that you can use to monitor signals from your muscles, from your heart, from your nervous system, from your brain, from your motion. So you have a lot of things that you can use, and they are all easy to use and easy to interface. So one of the things that we didn't want was for people to be limited in what they can do. And so we designed this almost like a Lego. So you can actually break stuff apart, you can reassemble them together, and you can actually create your own form factors in a very user-friendly way, and also in a way that works most of the times, at least. And then because a lot of people don't want to deal with actually creating their own tools, we've went beyond the hardware. So we started by solving this problem, which is how can we sense things in a different way that is more user-friendly and less cable and less hospital-bound. We started to release these, and then we had some people that didn't want to deal with the software, and so we started to build software that people can use to visualize this data. And we had people that wanted to interface these boards with the world, and so we started to create APIs that people can use to interface this with their own tools. And because some people really don't like PCBs and hardwares and stuff, we have some nice friends that do some design and that can hide the PCB to make it a little bit more human-friendly. And then, of course, we've launched this a few years ago, and it's just overwhelming the amount of stuff that people can do. So on one hand, like on the top left corner, we can see an example of a more low-cost and user-friendly medical device. That's an ECG machine that is a little bit smaller than a pack of cigarettes, and you can use it, you can build it with just a few euros. But then you can actually explore, and so on the top right corner, that's an example of a prototype of a mobile phone that actually measures your ECG when you hold it. You no longer need to take your shirt off or put gel and cables all over the place. You can simply hold the phone as you would when you are watching a video or answering an email and get a similar signal to the one that you would get using a hospital-grade device. And this is the kind of exploration that these technologies enable. And then, of course, we also like to have fun. And so in the middle, it's a flower that we've done as a project. We hooked up Vitalino to that to monitor the health of the flower. It had a web page to tell us if it was needing water or if it was too warm. And then it tweeted whenever it needed help. So we actually went a long way. And it works for some time, but during the summer, our research center closes, so we weren't able to go there and water the plant. And so she died. The story didn't end very well for the flower, but she didn't went silently into her final destination. She tweeted a lot just to keep that pressure on us for letting it die. And then, of course, because this is also a community of creative people. We have people that do a lot of oddball stuff. This is an example of a guy that likes his Vitalino so much that he takes it out for dinner. And so one day he took it out to eat chicken teriyaki, and he sent us a picture, and we said, well, why not? So it's quite an interesting concept. But this is all good. So on the technical side, you can get a picture of the things that you can do, but how are people actually using it to do stuff for actual users? Well, one of the things that we can measure is muscle activity. So many people may not be aware of, but whenever we flex a muscle, any muscle, there's an electrical signal that's actually sent from the brain to trigger the contraction of the muscle fibers. It's not motion, so if I wave my arm, that signal is there in some muscles, but not, for example, in my forearm. But only when I flex it, it's really there. And tomorrow in the workshop, by the way, which you can attend, you can see these things actually working. And one of the things that you can do, of course, is you can collect this in any muscle that you have on your body, and you can use it actually as an interface. This is an example of a project. It's kind of like the Mayo armband, but which shows a little bit of what you can do with these signals. So in this case, we have that PC, the board that I've shown initially, set up in the format of a bracelet that monitors 3 muscles around your forearm and also the motion. And this is connected to a Raspberry Pi that then translates the gestures into commands for the drone. And this is actual footage of the drone being controlled. So you can tell it to go left, you can tell it to go right. If you tilt your arm, it can go forward. And then in the end, there's a gesture inspired in Star Wars. And so you can use the Force and summon the drone to jump at you. Okay? And so this is actually something that you can do with this type of technology. So you can actually recognize gestures and apply them to something useful for improving people's lives. Another signal that you can do with this is monitor your heart. So, and from your heart, you can actually infer things that are more related with the emotional status of the person. So there's kind of this heart rate variability concept in which if you are concentrated, if you're concentrated in a task, your brain, like your processor, is assigning resources to that task, and it doesn't care too much about all the other processes, and so your heart rate wobbles a lot more than if you're not thinking of anything, where the processor can allocate the resources to the heart and it beats a little bit more steadily. And so one of the things that you can do is actually measure some of these signals, and this one actually has a sound, and this is an example of a work that we've done with Protopixel, a company based out of Barcelona, where they use the ECG as kind of an extension of an immersive space that detects the state of the user, and forget about the cables, I'll show you a few examples of how we improved on that. And it can detect if the person is feeling more aroused or if the person is a little bit stressed, and it can change the look and feel of the room and the audio to adapt to the person and kind of make more of a soothing sound if the person is perceived to be too stressed out, or more of a reactive sound if the person is perceived to be a little bit more calm and relaxed. And so you have like this experience, this immersive room that uses multimodal parameters in order to adjust its behavior to the state of the person. So this is highly audiovisual, and it can be enriched by these heart rate responses and other parameters that are measured from the person. And so this is an interesting example, but there's more. Another one that's quite interesting is a signal that not many people are familiar with, but is called a galvanic skin response. So sometimes we feel it, for example, when we are in traffic, very stressed out, and even now I'm feeling my hands a little bit sweated because I'm quite excited to be here. Sometimes we actually feel our hands becoming sweatier as we become more nervous or more excited, but this is a process that is always happening. Even when we don't feel the hands wet, the changes are always there. And this is something that we can measure and that we can use to interact and to extend our experiences. And here, better than me, there's a video that of a project that was done with this. This also has a little bit of sound to it, which was smart, using some of these sensors to do a media stunt where they actually implemented a lie detector on a smart car. And the way this would work was, they would pair the driver with the co-driver, and the co-driver would ask questions to the driver. If the driver was perceived to tell a lie, the test drive would stop. So the car would close the roof, and it would stop.
Yes, yes.
The first questions are quite easy. Can you put the volume up a little bit?
Do you sometimes Google yourself?
Yes.
Yes!
Have you ever posed like a bodybuilder in front of a mirror? Yes.
Do you think that women find you more attractive than your friend?
No.
No, that's a straight up lie.
It's not, dude.
You don't have to be kind, you have to be honest, dude.
Have you ever invited a girl to watch a movie just for the movie?
No.
Me neither.
Do you check your ex's profiles on Facebook once in a while?
Yes. Not really.
If I looked through your web browser right now, would you be embarrassed?
Yes.
Yes, definitely.
Have you ever had sex in your parents' bed?
Yes.
If you won $1 million, would you ever share it with your co-driver?
Yes.
Have you ever had a sexual fantasy that involved a man?
Yes.
Do you like your girlfriend's mother?
No. Oh, God. Why?
Do you like the boyfriend of your daughter?
No.
So this was kind of an experience that the designer set up using our tools, and it was really quick to set it up. And it was just a lot of fun. And one thing that I like to highlight about this movie is that biosignals make people very happy. We had a lot of smiles in this room, so it's really something that can augment your experience. There are a few caveats already. As you've seen in some of these, we are still bound by some of the wiring and all of the stuff that's involved in dealing with these sources that are maybe not as easy to manage as motion or tapping or touching. So there are still a few limitations that I'd like also to call for your attention. And basically, what we've been focusing on is solving some of these problems. That's what we like to do. We like to solve problems that enable other people to do more. What are some of the caveats? So many times we are still limited by the sticky pads and these things that are limiting in terms of usability. So we have to attach things to people. They are disposable, so we have to buy them all the time. So there are some inconveniences. And one of the things we've been doing is improving some of these interfaces. So this is an example of a keyboard with these two gray dots surrounded by the white areas that you see here, which do the same thing. They are just not sticky pads. If you touch those, you can actually get your ECG. It was what we were using in the phone example that I've shown you before. Another way is to use metal pads, and this requires, of course, the hardware to move along with these new interfaces which have different requirements than the sticky pads. And so this is an example of what we were using also on the gesture control for the drone, which is using stainless steel, a special type of stainless steel that can prevent the use of these more conventional approaches. Another example of an area where we've worked was on the automotive industry, where in this case we can have leather or we can have textiles that are conductive and that can measure the same signals without requiring the gel or all of that overhead that you normally find on the hospital grade equipment. And then, of course, as creative people, we've even saw at Sonar a couple of years ago people using bananas as an electrode. And so imagination is really the limit. So this was a project that was called Bananas for Sonar, where people actually used fruit as the way to get ECG and other signals into their interfaces, okay? So this can be really quite creative. one thing that I like also to refer is kind of the chaos that is somehow associated with these variables. And chaos in the sense that since it's not sometimes as controllable as touching, a voluntary gesture like touching or movement, one thing to keep in mind is that we have, on these signals, we have to take into account factors like how easy are the signals to control, how acceptable are they by the end users, how easy to observe are they, and how stable are they over time, because different signals have different properties that we need to handle. So in terms of control, we have different types. So there are signals that you can control voluntarily. I can flex the muscle voluntarily, and that's something that I can use. Others are indirect. I can hold my breath for some time, but not the whole time. So my body actually prevents me, as a defensive mechanism, of doing some things that could be harmful. And so I can only have so much control over that signal. And then, of course, there are some that are involuntary. For example, the digestion. I cannot control that process voluntarily. It's something that my body does autonomously. In terms of acceptance, then there are also other things to take into account. So some sensors are invasive. A pacemaker, for example, is a way to monitor heart signals, but I have to actually get inside the person to monitor them, okay? Then there are the wearables, like the heart rate wristwatches and stuff, and the off-the-person approaches, like the keyboard that I've shown before. And then in terms of observability, some signals are easier and more repeatable than others. So for example, the GPS is always there. It's a pervasive signal that I can monitor almost everywhere. Others I can only monitor momentarily. For example, blood pressure. If I want to use it for something, I cannot keep inflating and deflating the cuff all the time, because it's harmful for people as well. And then there are others that I can only monitor in a controlled location. And then in terms of stability, some signals are stable over time, like the muscle activity. If I flex my forearm today, it will be the same tomorrow and next month and the next year. Some of them are repeatable. For example, with the EEG, if I expose the person to a given stimuli, I can get a similar response back every time, but it's repeatable under a certain condition. And some of them are simply uncertain. So if I'm talking about an epileptic seizure or some user group that I want to monitor, those things happen without any ability to be predicted. And just as a final remark, in order not to eat too much into the questions time or into the lunch time, I would conclude by showing that this is the chaos that we would like to have. So we would like body signals to be fully controllable, fully acceptable, fully observable, and completely stable. And this is the chaos that we normally have. So it's much more difficult to work with these signals, but there's of course a gradient in between, which I will talk about in the workshop tomorrow. So thank you very much for your time, and again for the invitation to be here.